Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm Tracy Fessenden. I'm the acting director of the Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict. I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's event, Peace Humanities, Peace Building Through Literature and the Arts with Jolyon Mitchell. Today's event could not be more timely. It is part of the Center's Hart Nikachos Lectures in Peace Studies series. The Hart Nikachos Lectures in Peace Studies feature leading scholars and practitioners whose work highlights humanity's imagination of peace and efforts to construct peace in diverse locations, historical periods, and in our present moment. Our Peace Studies initiative was endowed by a gift to the center from Anne Hart, Professor Emerita of the Mary Lou Fulton College of Education, and her husband, Tony Nikachos. Anne was a devout Quaker whose deep religious commitments motivated her devotion to peace and conflict resolution. Our dear friend Anne passed away in November 2024, but her endowment and the Center's Peace Studies programming it supports, including this afternoon's lecture, are part of her lasting legacy, a concrete result of Anne's dedication to scholarship, religion, and the pursuit of peace. Anne's gift makes it possible for us to gather for this lecture today, and we also invite you to join us for the robust programming remaining in this academic year. We have two upcoming events that I want to highlight. Next Tuesday, April 14th at 4:30, join us in West Hall 135 to hear Center Assistant Research Professor Anand Gopal talk about his new book, Days of Love and Rage. Those of you who read The New Yorker will recognize Anand Gopal as a contributing writer to The New Yorker. Days of Love and Rage is based on his years of reporting in Syria and traces the flourishing of democracy in Syria, even amid horrific conditions of violence and oppression. Then on Thursday, April 23rd, for this year's culminating Spirituality in Public Life event, David Walker, professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, will be sharing his documentary, The Mormon Giant. And if you don't know who the Mormon Giant is, it's a professional wrestler who is actually a devout Latter-day Saint, was a devout Latter-day Saint, but Mormonism was also his wrestling gimmick. And this has, we'll watch the film, we'll have a live narration and some music as well. This special multimedia event will be held right here in the Biodesign Auditorium starting at 5 p.m. As always, details about our events can be found on our website, csrc.asu.edu. Recordings of most of our past events can be found on our YouTube channel. Now for a little housekeeping, please silence or turn off your cell phones. Today's event is also being live streamed, so I welcome all those who are joining us remotely. For those participating in person, I invite you to join us for an hors d'oeuvre reception served in the lobby after the event. And as you came in, you might have seen the little question cards on the console behind you. You can jot questions down as you listen to tonight's lecture and pass it to the end of the row. Center staff will collect these. For those of us joining us online, you can submit questions at any time by emailing them to csrc@asu.edu. And we'll take questions after the talk by Professor Mitchell. Finally, beyond these annual lectures, Anne Hart and Tony Nikachos' gift established the Hart Nikachos Chair in Peace Studies, held by our esteemed colleague, Professor of History Yasmin Saikia. Professor Saikia's leadership and determination to develop a more explicit focus on peace here at ASU has had a tremendous impact on the work the center does. I'll turn things over now to Yasmin to tell you more about peace studies at ASU, frame today's lecture, and to share something more about the exciting new initiative of Peace Humanities.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon. It's so lovely to see so many young faces and new faces join here for the lecture today. I want to start by sharing something that we have built together at the Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict before we move on to what we are doing next, and where you, particularly young students, can really fit in to the new project. So over the past several years, our People's Peace Project brought together more than 40 scholars from across the United States and around the world for 6 international conferences, resulting in 3 published volumes. Our most recent book on othering, it's in my purse, sorry, Politics and the Processes of Unpeace, was published in last year by Athabasca University Press and distributed by the University of Chicago Press, which is open access. All of you can read it if you want by just going online. You don't have to pay anything. And do share your responses if you have time before next year's Peace Lecture in April 2027. We'd love to hear from you what you think about the People's Peace Project. This project, the People's Peace Project, was a foundation for the new project that we are starting today and be building on for the next few years. We are launching something that I call Peace Humanities. Let me explain what we mean and why it matters now. We live in a world saturated with conflict, saturated with the language of security and deterrence, and yet everyone around us, ordinary people like you and me, feel unsafe and unseen. In moments like this, we are told to look at institutions, to our president, to the state, to international organizations, to the machinery of diplomacy and policy. I want to suggest we look somewhere else. I want us to look at the less visible spaces of human creativity, at what people make and remember and reach toward even in the hardest times. For example, a musician composing across enemy lines, a photographer finding a moment of tenderness in a war zone, a storyteller refusing the narrative of hatred and offering a tale of shared humanity instead, or strangers sharing a plate of food, or even the crumbs of bread and flour falling from the sky. These human acts of peace enable a community garden to grow where a wall of division once stood. These are not marginal or supplementary acts. They are, I want to argue, peace in the most essential form, and they have been happening unremarked, untheorized throughout human history. Peace Humanities begins with this recognition. Its founding claim is that peace is not only what is made through policy, diplomacy, and institutional mechanisms, it is made through the everyday acts of imagination, creation, remembering, and relationship building that people have always practiced, often without resources and often without recognition. Our project begins with the disciplines of the humanities, such as history, literature, the arts, music, cinema, photography, religious history, religious studies, and interfaith engagement, among many other things that the humanities covers, to center the peace research and peace education. It is not a decoration or supplement, but it is an intellectual and ethical substance that the work can create itself. This is not a familiar position in the field of peace studies. The dominant paradigm are conflict resolution, security studies, and peace building, which are grounded in the social sciences, in quantitative data, in institutional frameworks, and elite processes. But there are programs, such as I have found in Brandeis or at the Kroc School at the University of San Diego and elsewhere, that brings arts and the creative practices into peace-building work. We respect and learn from them. But what Peace Humanities proposes is something distinct, not the use of art as a tool within an existing peace paradigm, but a fundamental reorientation of the epistemological foundation of peace studies itself. We are asking not only how we make peace, but what kind of knowledge peace requires. And we answer that it requires the humanities. It is a capacity to read across time and culture, to hold multiple perspectives at once, to recover hidden histories of our coexistence, to understand the stories and images and religious traditions that shape what human beings believe is possible. Peace is not, at its root, a political problem. It is a human one. And the humanities are the disciplines that have spent centuries learning how to think about what it means to be human. in all our creativity, our suffering, our capacity for both violence and beauty. To center the humanities in peace research is not to retreat from the hard realities of conflict. It is to insist that those realities cannot be adequately understood or transformed without the kinds of knowledge that history, literature, religious studies, and the arts make possible. Peace humanities that we are going to develop insist that peacemaking belongs to everyone who can imagine, who can remember, who can connect across difference, not only people who are the experts or institutional actors. It places artists, storytellers, musicians, chefs, historians, religious studies scholars, and interfaith organizers at the center of the story as primary agents, not as populations to be managed or inspired audiences for policy. The evidence that it is not a naive optimism surrounds us. Humans continue, despite everything, to create across divides, to recover forgotten histories of coexistence, to make beautiful and meaningful things in the darkest of times. I particularly want the young students to keep this in mind, that even in the darkest of times, we can create something beautiful, which is a way of creating peace. So Peace Humanities takes that evidence seriously and will study it vigorously to ask what becomes possible when we can open a new field to imagine a human future. So with these words as a background to what we are going to do, I want to introduce our speaker today. We are honored today to welcome Professor Jolyon Mitchell as our inaugural peace lecturer. Professor Mitchell is principal, or what we call here in the United States, Dean of St. John's College at Durham University in the United Kingdom, and one of the most original and intellectual adventurous scholars working at the intersection of media, religion, and the arts for peacemaking. Oops. His work bridges theology, film studies, and peace and conflict studies, asking how the stories we tell, the images we create, and the imagination and the imaginative worlds we open through creative media shape our capacity to understand one another and to envision alternatives to violence. He has worked not only as a scholar, but as a practitioner, collaborating with filmmakers, artists, religious leaders, and community organizers to create conditions for genuine dialogue and understanding across profound differences. Educated at the University of Cambridge, Durham, and Edinburgh, formerly served as the director of the Center for Theology and Public Issues and academic director for the Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities at the University of Edinburgh. He was also the former president of Theology and Religious Studies of UK. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, an honorary fellow at the University of Edinburgh, and a life member of Clare Hall at the University of Cambridge. A prolific scholar, he is the author or editor of more than a dozen books, as well as many chapters and articles, including Promoting Peace and Inciting Violence, The Role of Religion in Media, published 2021, Religion and Peace, 2022, Picturing Peace, Photography, Conflict, Transformation, and Peacebuilding, that came out in 2025, and Media, Violence, and Christian Ethics, that came out in 2007. He's completing a book, A Passion for Performance, The Mysterious Resurgence of Religious Drama, that is forthcoming in 2027 from Oxford University Press. Beyond the academy, Professor Mitchell was a producer and journalist with BBC World Service and Radio 4. He has also served on international film juries in the Cannes, Berlin, and Venice film festivals, and directs several peace-building projects, including the one that led to a very widely co-edited volume that I had actually looked at and had found him there originally, called Peacebuilding and the Arts. He has also worked with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religious leaders, as well as the Palestinian and Israeli journalists on peace-building efforts in Jerusalem and beyond. But last but not the least, he is the proud father of Jasmine, the most recent winner of the Great British Bake Off. This is very big. He's recognized as the father of Jasmine, not Professor Mitchell, honestly, as he told me. Okay. Professor Mitchell's commitment to public scholarship and work that reaches beyond academy into communities, congregations, and creative practice embodies exactly what Peace Humanities is going to start with and will be about. His presence here as our inaugural lecturer is not incidental, it is a statement. It says that the peace paradigm we are building takes human creativity seriously in cinema and visual media, in religious storytelling, in the everyday cultural practices through which peace becomes possible in order to remake a shattered world. It says that scholars can also be practitioners, that intellectual rigor and human engagement are not in tension, and it says that we are serious about building a community of scholars, students, artists, and practitioners who recognizes themselves as peacemakers and who find in the humanities the tool and the wisdom for that work. Thank you all for being here, and we invite you to join as the work progresses, particularly the young students. Please keep in touch. We'll be doing a lot of Peace Humanities work, and we really want some of these young people who have come here to reach out to us, to CSRC, and tell us what you imagine Peace Humanities could look like, particularly for the youth. So with these words, please join me in giving Dr. Mitchell a very warm welcome to ASU, to this group, and thank you for coming all the way from UK.
Thank you very much. Could I say thank you, Yasmin, so much for that really generous introduction. Thank you also for Tracy, and thank you to Chad, to John Mark, and to also thank you to Dawn and to Alex and Jim and Sam as well. I'm really grateful for all the assistance and warm welcome, and the honor is mine to be here. I'm really enjoying being here. It's fabulous to have so much warm sunshine. We are, in the next few moments, going to go through a number of shadows, but hopefully by the end you'll see the sunshine is coming back. And what I simply want to do is not so much introduce you, but it might well be to remind you of, or maybe perhaps to bring into the room, a writer, an artist, and a composer. And each of these individuals contribute in different ways, I think, to help us think about Peace Humanities. So the first is a writer, and she was a young woman in the Edwardian age in England, brought up in Buxton, and had everything to live for. She did something which very few women at her age, she got a place in Oxford to study English, and she was so looking forward to her life and work there. She also had fallen in love, so she was like, everything seemed the sun was out. But then, of course, World War I began, and she found herself wanting not to go to Oxford to study at university, but to contribute in some way. So she volunteered as a nurse. And basically what happened was that she went through a very troubling experience. She moved from both being an active participant, a nurse, but also a passive spectator. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But she was active. She was looking after many people who, during the First World War, many young men who were seriously injured. For example, here, she wrote in Testament of Youth, I'd seen men without faces, without eyes, without limbs, men almost disemboweled, men with hideous truncated stumps of bodies. And I'm going to invite Alex just to read, because I think it's better to hear someone else's voice. These are little quotes from Testament of Youth, just to give you a feel. So as you hear these quotes, imagine each of you have got a pen in your hand, and perhaps you're going to highlight one phrase that captures the essence of it. So if you're okay, if you could just read this. Thanks, Alex. Oh, I better turn your mic on. Are you number... Does that work? Number 2. Does that work now? Is that better?
Oh, yeah. There it is. Okay. For a whole month in which off-duty time had been impossible, I had ceased to be aware of the visible world of the French countryside. My eyes had seen nothing but the wards and the dying, the dirt and dried blood, the obscene wounds of mangled men, and the lotions and lint with which I had dressed them.
Thank you. And then can I invite you again to think about the next quote as well? Again, imagine you've got a pen in your hand.
The strain is very, very great. The enemy is within shelling distance. Refugee sisters crowding in with nerves all awry, bright moonlight and airplanes carrying machine guns, ambulance trains jolting into the siding, all day, all night. Gassed men on stretchers clawing the air, dying men reeking with mud and foul green stained bandages, shrieking and writhing in a grotesque travesty of manhood. Dead men with fixed, empty eyes and shiny yellow faces.
One of the things accounts of First World War have tended to do, it's changed now significantly, is focus on the male experience. It's I think, notable to think about the women's experience of how they were traumatized, perhaps in a different way. And you can see that through this testament of youth.
I wish those people who write so glibly about this being a holy war could see a case, to say nothing of 10 cases, of mustard gas in its early stages, could see the poor things burnt and blistered all over with great mustard-colored, suppurating blisters, with blind eyes, sometimes temporarily sick, sometimes permanently, all sticky and stuck together and always fighting for breath, with voices a mere whisper, saying that their throats are closing and they're going to choke. And yet people persist in saying that God made the war, when there are such inventions of the devil about.
Thank you very much. If we had more time, we could go through each quote if you like, to sort of drink in what she wrote. And you could imagine, if you were highlighting one phrase from it, what might it be? Anyone want to add anything? If you had a pen here, which one would you throw at me that I think captures the essence of what she's saying there? Just a way of processing it. There's not a right answer. Yeah. Saying that God made the war when there was such a mention of the devil about. Thank you. What's your name? Maria. Thank you, Maria. That's great. Now, these were the loves of her life. Her brother, her fiancé, who was her fiancé, Roland Leighton, and another very close friend. And there was a fourth guy called Geoffrey as well, that she was very fond of. And she describes how on Christmas Day she was waiting with her family. She could not wait for Roland to walk in the door to the hotel because he was on leave. And he didn't arrive, and they just assumed the reason he didn't arrive was because maybe the boat had been delayed. The next day, she got a phone call. She rushed to the phone. She was so happy to pick up the phone because she knew it would be Roland speaking, but it was actually Roland's sister saying that on the 23rd of December, he had been killed. And she was understandably heartbroken. By the end of the war, her great friend Victor, Geoffrey, her friend, had also died, and Edward, her brother, had also died. So not only was she an active participant, there was a sense in which she was a passive observer because she couldn't do anything. She couldn't save their lives. There was a moment where she thought that she would actually, because I think Roland had died and so had Geoffrey. I think Victor, she went to see him. He was blind in hospital, and she had decided she would marry him just to look after him. Such was, and it tells the story very evocatively in the Testament of Youth. Thank you. Could you read this one as well? Thanks.
Although I have often wished I was dead, it seems so unfair that I should be left to enjoy these things and he not. And I feel as if I am taking an unfair advantage of him and can never enjoy them again because he can't.
I confess when I read these texts again just before this afternoon, just to remind myself, I actually found myself beginning to cry because I don't normally do that with text, but it's interesting. The reason was because I just started imagining what it would be like. You imagine if the people closest to you, not just one or two, three, but they were, but you were also engaging with trying to look after people as well. So there's a sense of powerlessness. I just want to contrast here. We've been looking at an autobiography, a memoir, as it's sometimes known. This is a 2015 film, a short clip. See what strikes you about this. For me, though, I found the book evoked more in the imagination. You might find it different, but if you haven't, hands up if you read Testament of Youth. you have a treat in store. It's worth, honestly, it is really worth reading. I think it's one of the great books that emerged out of the First World War, indeed in the 20th century. It was a huge hit when she produced it in 1933. And she writes in it, women get all the dreariness of war and none of the exhilaration. She said, their experience was, I see differently now. I have a numb dissolution. Now, a lot of people have written about her work. For example, this thinking about what was she doing in this book? Was it just about, it wasn't just making drama, it was actually trying to process what had happened to her, an attempt to reenact traumatic events as a way of understanding them and recovering from their devastating effects. So this was part of the process. She was trying to make sense of what had happened to her. And if you think about it, it's worth thinking about how sometimes memoirs are both unique, because they're just one person's story, but they're also, part of the power of this story was they're representative. They represent not just one person's grief, but a whole generation's grief. So it's worth just thinking how a memoir such as this works. We could, of course, if we had time, look at All Quiet on the Western Front. I know I was talking to Alex about this book. This is a book, is to be, from a German perspective, is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will simply try to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war. So this is a different kind of story. It's a novel turned into a famous 1930 film. Recommend both to you if you haven't watched or read them. Now, when I was thinking about this yesterday, I was very kindly... Yasmin and Chad took me to this museum here, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend an exhibition which brings together, I think, Kay Walkingstick, who is a Cherokee native, with her pictures of Niagara Falls with the Hudson School. And what I found fascinating about this exhibition was it juxtaposed two different perspectives on the same reality. And you can do that also in literature and thinking about something like the First World War. So, for example, we've looked in some detail at the Testament of Youth. What happens if you were to look at the First World War through someone like John Buchan? You've perhaps heard of the 39 Steps. This is turned into about 3 different films. I think Hitchcock made one of them. And it's sheer adventure. It was written in 1915. People read it in the trenches. It's very exciting. It's daring do. And he's very pro-imperial and pro-war. You can see this is a still from one of the films. But he did a John Hannay, as they're known. They're exciting adventures. The third one is called Mr. Standfast, and it's often seen as a critique of pacifism. But it's actually clever in that. If you read it, it's actually saying there are different kinds of pacifism, and some are stronger than others. So here is an example of, you might see it as pro-war, but it's a little bit more complicated. Of course, we could look at Tolstoy. This is a quote out of Anna Karenina, where he writes, "You consider war to be inevitable. Very good. Let everyone who advocates war be enrolled in a special regiment of an advance guards for the front of every storm, every attack, to lead them all." This is in the context of a dialogue. It's a debate. So it's born out of his experience. He was a soldier. Tolstoy was a soldier and wanted to win medals, and he wrote, almost like a journalist, Sebastopol sketches. And he wrote very powerfully about war, and we could talk about that for a while. And then, of course, he wrote in some extent about war and peace, but he later would become, a pacifist in the way that Vera Brittain did as well. So you'll see I just give those as examples of writers who in different ways have critiqued or celebrated war. But of course, I think what they're doing is they are bearing witness. And just to hold that into that category in one, as we move on, we've thought about writers, particularly about Vera Brittain, but I'd like to move on now to an artist, to Käthe Kollwitz, a German artist, female artist. Now, Käthe Kollwitz was one of the best-known 20th century, early 20th century artists, and she had 2 sons, Peter, and Peter went to her at the beginning of the First World War and said, "Please, Mum, I want to fight. I want to serve my country." She said, well, she was persuaded eventually. They went to father, who also agreed, okay, and sadly so they talked, yes, they let him go. Within 4 weeks, sadly, he had been killed on the front. And for the next, he died at 18, And for the next 18 years, she tried to find an artistic way of expressing her grief, her heartbreak for the loss of her son. And she describes what happened. That point in time marked the beginning of my old age, my walking towards my grave. There was a rupture, a bending down so low that I will never be able to stand straight. And then she wrote, I've tried again and again to represent war. I was never able to capture it. Now, finally, I have finished a series of woodcuts that come close to expressing what I've always wanted to express. So she created these woodcuts, and you can maybe make out here, that is actually like Peter's face. This is like a sort of dance of death. And you can see different responses to war, sort of astonishment, almost sort of eyes shut, almost ecstasy as well. So these were the volunteers. She struggled to represent how parents respond when they have lost their loved ones in war. For example, here, or mothers. And if we had more time, I could show you other attempts that she took that she rejected. They were different representations that they rejected. And she wrote, in fact, would someone else like to read that for me? Just have a break. Would a volunteer, quick volunteer to read? Yes, thank you. Can you shout it out for us?
These prints should be sent all over the world and give everybody the essence of what it was like. This is what we all went through during these unspeakably hard times.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Alex.
Alex, thanks, Alex. It's great. Those were the prints, and this is probably one of her best known, No More War in 1924. It was banned by the Nazis. But it's this that finally she ended up creating to represent. These are called grieving parents, and you can see them here. And Peter is here. This is a Belgian cemetery. So there's a sense in which when they saw this, they wept when they saw this, because notice here, sometimes grief doesn't necessarily bring people together. It can separate them. And you can see here, look at how the mother's responding, look at how the father's responding. So Kathy Kollwitz is often seen as an anti-war artist. She became, to begin with, she was actually very, very pro-war. But losing her son and then seeing what the First World War did to a generation of young people that she felt protective of changed her view about war. But of course, we could look at pro-war artists. I could show you pictures from the 19th century sort of celebrating the charge of the Light Brigade, but I thought some more recent ones would be interesting. This, for example, is in eastern Ukraine, and this is portrayed by some Russians, and you can maybe see this was some territory that they took. But on the other side in Kyiv, you'll see Mary is often seen as the protector of Kyiv, but notice that's a, well, you know what that is. So, or if we had time, if we could go to an hour outside Moscow, we could go to this main cathedral of the Russian armed forces. In this cathedral, you will find someone like Patriarch Kirill celebrating holy war, saying this is the right thing you should be doing. But if you look around this cathedral, you will see some extraordinary things on the walls. You'll see all sorts of characters. And this is very strange. Not just saints from Russian history, this is Vladimir, but also you will see here generals from the Great Patriotic War, and quite incredibly, given how many Christians he killed, Stalin as well. There's a story that they actually were making a mural of Putin, and he said no, he didn't want it on the wall there in this place. Of course, we need to be a bit careful about, because I could take you to lots of cathedrals in Britain, in Durham, for example, or in Canterbury, where there are chapels celebrating, commemorating, you could say rightly so, the deaths of people who'd given to serve for their country. So I'm raising these questions, but just bear these pictures in mind. Another place might be worth bearing in mind is, can anyone guess which country this is taken from? I'll buy you a drink if you get it right. Sorry? Not China? Not Cambodia, no? Yeah? No, not Japan. What's your name? Brent, no? North Korea, no. By the way, I didn't tell you, if you get it wrong, you buy me a drink. So that's I'm only choosing. So this is actually from the 1980-88 Iran-Iraq War. And these here, of course, the Iraqis had a lot more technology, but what Iran had, what did they have? They had many, many more people who were prepared to sacrifice their lives. Because as you know, in Shia Islam, at the very center of it is martyrdom. The grandson of the Prophet, peace be upon his name, gave his life, so it's seen at the point in Karbala. So you can see here, these representations. Again, this is martyrs overwhelming the tanks. In the cemetery, if you were to go into Tehran during the Iran-Iraq War, you can see this. This was a fountain that had, it wasn't blood, but it was made it look like blood, sort of paint coming through here. If you were to go round a university like here in Iran, go to the University of Tehran, you will find on the walls huge pictures of martyrs. So it's worth bearing in mind, if there are more martyrs, this ties in with the whole narrative and may actually generate more resistance. So by killing people in Iran, it may actually not help your war causes. But however, of course, this is the only one I could find of the pictures that I found, which is sometimes called the Scent of Heaven, or it could also be called the grief. Of course, here is someone, loved one, missing just the scent of the loved one who's lost there. So you can see how artists can bear witness to the pity and the grief of war. If we have more time, we can think of as a contrast to Kathy Kollwitz, Otto Dix. What religious building does this remind you of? Here. Have a think. What that might be. Renaissance, High Renaissance, think Rome, think Sistine Chapel. You've maybe seen there's the creation of Adam, but of course he's playing with that. But the only difference is either God is missing or the dead Adam is missing. So you can see, you maybe know the famous one, the touching of bringing to life. Notice the disfigures fixtures. And if you contrast here, this is by a British artist called Paul Nash, and it's called We Are Making a New World. We Are Making a New World. And he was told by his art tutor, you can't paint faces. So instead he tried to put scarred landscapes to represent the impact of war here. So this is Paul Nash. Famous, and it's quoted by this French photographic journalist. You could, of course, also see here, this is the person, this is an official artist. He was there at Versailles. He was so cross with the politicians, he decided, do you see what's happened here? He distorted the mirrors and showed, it's almost like the mirrors are putting a question mark over the piece here. So you can see all sorts of questioning through the visual arts there in Versailles. But the artist I focused on is partly because of her experience of grief. This was before the death of her son. This is after. And she writes about how she was trying to capture just the grief in her face that she faced and experienced. But also which she experienced as mothers here. And can you just notice here this attempt by the mother to protect the child from what they are seeing, the grief that they're facing by. And there's something when you look at this art that as one art critic described, her silent lines penetrate the marrow like a cry of pain. One of the leading scholars in peacebuilding, you perhaps come across him, is Jean-Paul Lederac. Jean-Paul Lederac, halfway through his career, had a terrible car crash. And he nearly died, but before the car crash, and he's happy to talk about this, I've sort of talked to him about it, he wrote very logically, rationally, very philosophically, very clear. But then after, he became much more poetic and emphasized the importance of the arts, the importance of Peace Humanities. And he does in this book about the moral imagination. And he talks about the arts there in some detail, and visual arts in particular, and the importance of curiosity and stepping into other people's worlds. And that's perhaps part of the power of visual arts, is it invites us into other people's worlds in a different way, but in a parallel way to someone like Vera Brittain. Okay, finally then, I'd like to think about a composer, Benjamin Britten. This is a stained glass window memorializing his work. And following the Second World War, which devastated a number of buildings all over Europe, including Coventry Cathedral, this was a service soon after the Coventry Cathedral, They rebuilt it as a modern one here, and they commissioned Benjamin Britten to create a piece of music. And he created, which many describe as his masterpiece. And he wrote it in 1961-62. And what it does is it juxtaposes, it brings together the Latin Mass, a Requiem Mass, things that Mozart and Verdi had done, but within it, he put alongside the poetry of Wilfred Owen. So it was almost like Wilfred Owen's poetry was commentating on the Latin Mass. It was a huge hit for a bit of classical music. It sold thousands of copies in the first few weeks. I'm going to give you a taste of it. So what it did was it attempted to bring together two choirs, a children's choir, an adult choir. It also had soloists who sang the poems of Wilfred Owen. And what happened was they had a Russian, an English, and a German singer, but the Russian, because it was during the Cold War, wasn't allowed out. They eventually got out and sang in a later performance. But in 2018, it was turned into an opera by the English National Opera. It was a huge hit, very successfully visually. Just give you a taste of this and some people's responses to it. These are some of the pictures of some people disfigured during the First World War.
I thought it was incredible, really moving, really powerful.
It was really, really beautiful.
I'm still in awe and I'm still trying to process what just happened.
The visuals are stunning.
It was fantastic. I did quite a lot of crying. It was beautiful.
Definitely go and see it. It's visually stunning.
Come along with open eyes and an open heart and see how it moves you. It's incredible.
Now, you may be thinking, why have you chosen War Requiem? Well, partly because it's seen as a masterpiece. But you could say, well, isn't opera a bit elitist? Isn't it a bit exclusive? Well, some people say that this production actually opened it to wide audiences. But of course, anti-war music you can find in different contexts as well. Now, you might say that's far from pro-war. It's the opposite. It was anti-troubles, and it was banned in some places. But it's, for some people I've spoken to in Northern Ireland, to say it's part of their sort of audioscape, their memories of their childhood. But of course, you could contrast that with more pro-war music, such as Tchaikovsky's celebration of the end of Napoleon's attempt to take over Russia. Notice how the cannons are used. I think of them. So, of course, we've got the cranberries there. But I just want to, we could spend a bit of time thinking about the contrast of those three pieces of music. But I want to step back for a moment, and this is a really useful book if you're interested in this, on When Blood and Bones Cry Out. It's by John Paul Lederer and his daughter, who's a professional musician. And basically, one of the arguments is that peace treaty is all very well, logical is all very well for changing the way we think about conflict, but actually conflict sometimes breaks people's hearts and hurts in the gut, and actually changes us in really difficult ways. Music, sometimes more than words, allows us to articulate that heartbreak more effectively. So that's partly that, and they talk about drumming, they talk about different sort of conflicts as well. How are we for time? Because I can't see the time. Have I got 5 more minutes? Is that okay? Are you sure? I can stop now if you want. You can say, okay, 5 more minutes then. And of course, another example of something more classic one, sort of Carl Jenkins, The Peacemakers. Just give you a taste of this.
Peacemakers is a new piece I've written. I can't remember the initial kind of genesis of it all, but it was an idea to write a piece of music where the words are about peace. So the idea slowly came into being that I might be able to use the words of iconic peacemakers. So the obvious names came to mind: Mandela, Gandhi, Dalai Lama, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and those are probably.
So I just use that as another example of a different composer from Benjamin Britten. But what we've done is we've thought about, in a little bit of detail, we've thought about a writer, an artist, a composer. We thought about Vera Britten's experience and how she responded to her own encounter with the First World War. Kathy Kollwitz, a German artist, and then also Benjamin Britten, who actually visited Belsen, and that changed the way in which he thought about what she was doing. He became a pacifist as well, and thinking that war really is not the way. And he wrote War Requiem 5 miles away from a military base. And he was actually writing some of the Requiem as he heard British and American bombers taking off. So it's interesting to bear that in mind. Now, we talked about people, but I think if I was just to step back from these people for a moment and with you think about what's been happening, one, in each of the ways through their different arts, they've been bearing witness both to the heartbreak of war. Some people would say the glory of war. Other people would say the pity of war. Some people would say also they're attempting to transform violence through their arts. And others perhaps even raise this question about imagining hopeful futures. Well, how can Peace Humanities imagine hopeful futures? Is it just reflecting on people's grief? Well, that's kind of understandable. But it's like it leaves us with an encouragement to empathy, which I think part of the great thing of good writing is that it encourages us to step in. What does it feel like to be somebody else, to put yourself into somebody else's shoes? Or is it something like this that brings us, this is sometimes called reconciliation, this statue. This is actually in Berlin, in what was the death zone. You can also see it in Hiroshima, outside Stormont in Northern Ireland as well. And it's the story of a man and wife who, they were separated by the Second World War, and they came back together again after a very, very long journey. Sometimes peace building through the arts is represented in this way, like, oh, we're going to all come together again. I don't think it works like that always. I think it's a little bit more complicated. And that's why I think perhaps this captures what the act of Peace Humanities might be more. It's a reaching towards. This is called Hands Across the Divide, representing the Catholics and Protestants coming together in London, Derry. You might bear those 3 different sort of statues in mind as different ways of thinking about how the arts can work in Peace Humanities. Of course, this view to a peace has its ambiguities. Scott Appleby talks about the ambivalence of the sacred. I think it's important also to talk about the ambivalence of Peace Humanities. Humanities can encourage people towards acts of violence and brutality as well as towards acts of sacrifice and peace building. And of course, where we stand, this is in Edinburgh in the Botanic Gardens. I wish I could take you all there now. But I really like this because you just imagine if you are there, you look through that, you'll see perhaps Arthur's Seat, which is the mountain extinct volcano in Edinburgh here. But if you were standing here, don't know your name, what's your name? Richard. If you were there, you would perhaps see the castle. So the point is, a frame draws our attention into somewhere, but also, of course, we bring, each of us in this room, bring a different frame of reference to what we see, what we read, what we hear. So there is an encounter that happens that means that we respond differently. Perhaps 2 things to finish with. We've looked at different kinds of trees. This is one tree that I can't get out of my mind just outside the old wall in Jerusalem, and it's called a tree of hope. Can you make out what it is? Can you make out the leaves here? What are they? They're not leaves, are they? They're swallows. And the reason they're there is because it's trying to represent these swallows can go over the barriers. They don't need to be held back by the walls. Hence a tree of hope, not a tree of grief. And alongside that, something which has different sort of leaves of hope in, I'd like to finish with a Ukrainian piece of art, a well-known artist, showed to some Ukrainians recently. And this is called A Dove Has Spread Her Wings and Asks for Peace. So sometimes there is something in art which invites us to think, imagine peace. But also here, This was in a little Ukrainian village that was bombed. It was in flames, and people in the village knew it was her art in there, and they rushed into the gallery, pulled out the art, and saved a number of copies of her art, because they knew the art was so important for holding on not just their cultural heritage, but imagining a hopeful future. So that's where we should stop. Thank you so much for being here and listening. Thank you for reading. But let's stop there, and I'll hand a microphone over to whoever would like a microphone. So.
Sorry. Thank you. That was visually so rich, and just filled the appetite with all the senses, and just very rich. Thank you so much. I know that Alex is going around with the note cards. If anybody has questions, please jot it down, and we will address it to Professor Mitchell to answer them. If anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, and we'll pass the card along. Questions? Yeah. Do you have one already? Okay. Yeah. We have one question. So before we get to this question,
yes, great.
I have a question.
Okay, far away.
You showed us so many images
yes.
that showed violence and conflict, and after violence and conflict and war, something representing hope, which is peace. Have you come across any kind of art or music that actually makes peace, not represents peace, not documents it, but makes peace? And if you have, can you share that with us before we get to this question?
Certainly. No, thank you very much. That's a really good question. I think of a musician who goes into the Balkans, and he works there with musicians, and he invites them to make music from different sides of the conflict. In the same way, the East-West Divan Orchestra in Israel-Palestine, I know there are criticisms of them, but nevertheless, the attempt is to make music together to cross over boundaries. So that's for music. I think for visual arts, yes, I mean, there are so many different examples, but I think of one example of one artist who actually put, I've got a 2-minute clip. I could show it to you. Shall I show it to you? What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you want a 2-minute? I mean, I left it out because I wanted to keep to time, but it, in a way, answers your question, because I think arguably it makes peace, but in a slightly controversial way. So have a watch this. The filmmaker was very keen I showed it to you, so she'll be really happy to know that I got to show it to you. Some people are more sort of a bit concerned because they say they're making a wall which is ugly, beautiful. So there's some controversy, but nevertheless, it does bring together people from different religious traditions. So I just use that example of a play. I mean, that's a concrete example in answer to your question. So
Thank you. So what's your take on songs like Fortunate Son, which was originally a critique of the Vietnam War, but is now associated with pro-war and pro-military propaganda? How should changing interpretations like this be met?
That's a really good question. Is that a Bob Dylan song or not? Who is it? Okay, I need to look it up because I don't know. So would you like to sing it for us or not? No, you wouldn't know.
Also the song Born in the USA, Bruce Springsteen, very much an anti-war song that has turned into
That's
a patriotic
so
anthem.
And I think it's such a good question, because it raises questions about the biography of pieces of art that, the author, the writer, the composer they want to do one thing with a piece of art. Once it's out there, people use it in lots of ways. So it shows that the meaning making doesn't just go on in the head or heart of the composer or writer or memoir. It also is us. We make meaning of it, and we can use it and adapt it. So it's a good question, but it shows, we don't control. I know I have some artist friends who get very cross that their pieces of art are used in different ways, but I suppose that's, I guess why one of the rich things about a fabulous university like yours is it's a community of learning that allows you to interpret things together and say, hang on a sec, that wasn't intended that way. If you like, we keep each other to account. So was it Taha? Taha, yeah. Do you want to come back on that? Because it's such interesting. Do you want to hand a mic? Yeah, Taha.
Well, I'm not very good at being put on the spot, but I guess another example that I was thinking of was the Red Army Choir. They adapted many traditional Russian folk songs as a way to galvanize both the Red Army and sort of motivate them. And so I don't want to focus on the bad. So I'm trying to see, I'm trying to think of some example of maybe like a pro-war song or media that that ended up being, used against war or to promote peace.
Well, it's a good question, and we might be able to think about that afterwards. So thank you for. I suppose the one thing I would say is one of the things about some of the things I've been putting up is it's emotionally. Some of them you may not have found this, but they're potentially emotionally very strong. You perhaps can think of other examples that things which will sort of touch your heart, not just your head. Now, there's something which is great about that. There's something quite dangerous about that as well, isn't there? Because if you think about, that's a potential for manipulation. I've watched sort of Russian music, rock musicians singing, celebrating nuclear war, but doing it really well. I mean, it's good. It's kind of quite good music. You think, gosh, that's slightly worrying when you start thinking about the implications of that. So it's worth thinking about, isn't it, that certain forms of persuasion through the arts can be deeply problematic, but also can be very good because they can actually move us towards thinking about a world where we don't go to violence as our first resort. Because of course, and this is where it becomes more complicated because of course the just war approach is that war is your last resort, not your first resort. Now, how the arts represents that's another question. So thank you for raising that.
Also you, because we would love to collaborate as we keep working on this. How can we get involved in Peace Humanities? How can we facilitate peace building beyond our local communities? So how can we do it beyond our local communities? Maybe you can answer that question. And if this is coming from a student, how can you get involved in Peace Humanities? Please reach out to us, Alex, John Mark, myself, Yasmin Saikia, Tracy. We are all here. Send us your emails, send us your ideas. We have just started this, launched this project, and we were just talking about it. How can we involve students? And one of the ideas actually I got is from your daughter now. Instead of the British Bake Off, we don't do baking here, right? So let's think of some other way in which students can do something that is community-centered, okay? Give me ideas, and we will make it happen at the Center of Religion Study and Conflict to say, this is how we can start imagining what the humanities teaches us to be actually practiced in order to develop something that contributes to Peace Humanities that is just being launched, okay? So you are at the we're at the very ground floor of this work, and so let's build it together. Give us ideas.
Thank you. I mean, I thought of a famous quote you probably heard, which is just quite simply, to act locally and to think globally. That in a way, I love the idea of, we were talking about this kind of, thinking about how food can bring people together. It can separate people as well, but actually think about how food brings people together. I think it's all right to quote Jasmine. She part of her vision for cooking is that she'd say, actually, it's about bringing people together. That's what she loves doing, bring different people around a table together. So that's one thing. Another, we were talking about gardens, thinking about the environment. How do you create sustainable peace in a world which is, my hunch, in 100 years' time, hopefully we'll still be here, but in 100 years' time, when people look back at our generation and generation that goes after us, we'll be saying, what did we do with the land? What did we do with nature? And that's why putting up some of these First World War pictures, we are making a new world. What kind of world are we making? Not just in our imaginations, but with our hands and our personal choices and our national choices as well. So
now, if you don't want to write a question, but just ask, please feel free to stand up and raise your hand. Yes, please.
Should we pass the microphone over? So, yeah.
One of my heroes for probably 10 or 15 years has been the man J.R., a French photographer. Do you know him and his work as he goes around? And he really draws community in with all sorts of things.
I'm sorry, I don't say the name again.
J.R., just the two letters.
I don't, and I'm sorry, I'll look him up. So,
okay.
No, thank you very much. What's your name?
Bethany.
Bethany, what draws you to his work? Bethany.
The way he brings people together. Most of you may know him not by his name, but he's the one that did the child looking over the border wall. a baby that he saw. So he makes massive photos, and but he goes around the communities in Israel. He photographed two, an Israeli and a Palestinian barber, and on, and pasted the wall on the. Who are these? You know, they don't have an identity. They're two people that are barbers. He's just done hundreds of things where he draws people together. Did a fabulous one in the prison in California. But anyway, worth looking.
Oh, it's really interesting. Just going back to a previous question, everyone in here, I would think most of us have a camera on us. And there are some places in our college, for example, we have a photographic competition. You can have it around Peace to actually see if you can capture a moment. One, Henri Cartier-Bresson talks about the decisive moment in photography. So while I don't know his work, it's interesting how certain photos grab us. Roland Barthes talked about two different kinds of pictures. There are the studium pictures that we just sort of flip out, we ignore. But then there's the punctum, and that's a photograph that actually hits us there in the heart. But it's not just the photograph, it's perhaps a little thing within the photograph. So it might be, for example, someone taking their gloves off, picking up a baby at Oklahoma City after the bombing and holding the baby to try and rescue them. That photograph won lots of prizes, but a lot of people commented on it was the gloves taking off and just the sheer love of the fireman looking at the baby. So in a way, it's worth thinking about what is it in a particular photograph that acts like a punctum, that does awaken our imagination and make us think, actually, we need to change this. The one thing I would say, and I think it's worth thinking about Peace Humanities, there is another danger here, there's a risk, isn't there? If we feel we've been emotionally moved by something, it's quite easy to think, oh, I've done the work. Well, actually, we haven't done any work. We've just been moved by something. That is not the work. That's something that may lead to action. But it's not like, you know, it's the power, isn't it? If you go to a really good film or a piece of music, it might make us cry. But, well, okay, that's good. We've maybe had a cathartic experience, but what then do we do with it? We may be purged, but maybe we need to contribute to peace building elsewhere. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bethany. I'm sorry I didn't know that. I'll look up the photographer. But it's really interesting thing. Yeah. And I think one other thing I would say about some photographers I've met, they are actually, like Vera Brittain, they are traumatized by what they take. You know, they are human as well. Sometimes they desensitize, but other times just having to take certain kinds of photographs is not good for your heart, soul, or imagination necessarily. So to be careful for them.
We have time for one more question. Someone has a question? Well, we have time. Oh, okay.
Yata, my name is Laura Lanyazi, and I'm from the Navajo Nation. And I've seen you mention a lot of parallels through indigenous philosophies as well. And I'm not saying we take credit, but it was just really like a bunch of parallels that I've seen. And you also mentioned K walking sticks from the Heard Museum. And I was just wondering are you thinking of any collaborations with indigenous scholars too to include in this work? If so, could you name a few of them or certain pieces that you've seen besides K walking stick?
Yeah, thank you so much. Could you say your name again? Because I didn't hear it. Sorry.
Laura Lynn.
Laura Lynn, thank you so much. Thank you.
You.
Yeah, that's a very important question. And I think it's one of the absences, apart from K walking stick, because I'm very aware in terms of my selection of ethnicities. It was a particular ethnicity. There was a Euro focus on it. Nevertheless, I suppose because of working in other places where, such as, I suppose thinking specifically about some Aborigine artists, thinking about peace building there, how they might bear witness to, for example, what happened in Tasmania. And I'm sorry, I should remember the name of the artist, and I can't, but it will come back to me in the middle of the night, and I'll phone you up. So I suppose, and for me, I'm really glad I went to the Heard Museum, because it was like opening a door into a new world. It's not something I've studied in detail, and it's something I need to do a lot more work in. So if you have advice, I'd be really open to it, because I'm clearly need to do a lot more work on it. I suppose it's also thinking about thinking, I suppose, in a European context, I mean, the context I know best, some of the relationships can be the most strained between people who would describe themselves as brothers and sisters. They can be some of the most fractious. And you can see that, for example, in Northern Ireland. And I think just thinking there, two people who the Catholic would say they were the indigenous, and the Protestant would say as the incomers. So you could see, we didn't have time to look at the sort of mural artists, but there are a number of mural artists who might say, we are the indigenous artists, and we are trying to express the heartbreak of our community. One of the things that some peace builders say is that when you really start to have takeoff in peace building, it's when you can articulate the other people's story in a way in which the other person says, yes, that's my story. And really, if you do that with art, then that's a very powerful thing. So it's not just about me expressing my heartbreak. It's about me being able to say to someone, yeah, actually, this is how it must have felt for you or for your community. To be able to say that takes bravery and a lot of empathy. And that's why I think Peace Humanities is so rich, because it invites us into other people's worlds to allow us to do that well and wisely. So thank you so much for your question.
Let's give a round of applause to show our appreciation. Thank you, Professor Saikia, Professor Mitchell, to all of you who came out today. Thank you to Alex Brooks for your wonderful reading, as well as all of the work you did with Sam Mapfunda and Don Beeson and John Mark Shangyo to make this event possible. If you tuned in online, I hope you also enjoyed yourselves as thoroughly as I have. We hope to see you at the next event. You can grab flyers in the lobby on your way out. And speaking of food, please enjoy the hors d'oeuvres that we've set out to encourage you to stay a bit longer and make some connections and have some conversation on the topics that Professor Mitchell has introduced. And of course, here in the center, we depend on your generosity, so please keep us in mind if you are in the mood for giving. Thank you so much, and we wish you a wonderful end of the week and safe travels.